Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
All right, guys, welcome to our family roundup. So this is where I bribe my children to come talk to me about topics that I'm thinking about, and excited to have with me Kelsey, and she is at the same time watching our amazing little grandbaby, Elijah, also her son. Hey, buddy. He's very happy to be on the camera. We also have Elisa, who's here with me in Claremont, Florida. I almost said California. I think there's a Claremont, California. And then Sydney, who's back in Kentucky in the attic. All right. Hey, bud. Okay, so we're going to talk about, we'll see. We'll do 3 or 4 topics today. We'll see how we go. I want to start with transhumanism, which is everyone's favorite topic. So there was a video that went viral this week. I wanted you guys get your guys' take on this. This video by somebody named Laura Aboli, who I'm unfamiliar with, but she said some things and espoused a particular theory that I was wanting to talk to you guys about, wanting to explore. Apologize for the annoying background music in this clip, but I would love us to listen to this one and talk about it. So we're going to listen to her for a minute and then see where this goes. Here we go.
The destination, it becomes much easier to look back and identify the psychological conditioning, the biological tempering, the cultural grooming, and the educational prepping that we have been subjected to for decades in preparation to making us accept a post-human future.
So this is her thesis, is that there is a broad, I don't know if she would say a conspiracy, but something is happening that kind of move us, that's fundamentally anti-human about where we're headed, and that we are being groomed to participate in the annihilation of our species. That's all. Nothing alarming.
It takes a lot of physical and psychological abuse to get an intelligent species like ours to agree to its own extinction. Most, if not all, that has transcended in the last 60 years was designed to get us closer to accepting such a dystopian reality. Whether you care to accept it or not, we live in a hyper-controlled matrix where our perception of reality is meticulously planned, managed, and executed in order to control and steer us in whichever direction they wish. And the direction is a post-human world.
Now she's using the word they. They wish, okay, the scary they. So we can talk about who they may be, but that's another piece of this.
With this, they first needed to destabilize, dehumanize, and demoralize humanity through every means possible. The destruction of the nuclear family, children being indoctrinated by the state, abortion, the eradication of God and spirituality from education, life in mega cities and away from nature, toxic food, air, and water, social media, replacing real human connection and interaction, engineered financial crisis and taxation, endless wars and massive migration, stress, anxiety, depression, drugs and alcohol, constant fear-mongering, moral relativism as the new religion. And I could go on and on about how humanity has been influenced and forced to move away from all the things that give us strength, security, purpose, and meaning. A weak, immoral, disconnected, ignorant, and unhealthy population is an easy target for the next stage, the creation of an entire generation of androgynous beings.
Okay, now we get to, so you're saying there's all this control, but it's ultimately in the service of getting to phase 2, which is the creation of a population of androgynous beings.
Masculinity is under attack psychologically, culturally, and biologically. Women are being replaced in sports, entertainment, and politics by men pretending to be women. And children are being indoctrinated at school to think that gender is a choice. The transgender movement is not a grassroots movement. It comes from the top. It has nothing to do with people's freedom of expression, sexuality, or civil rights. It's an evil psyop with a clear agenda to get us closer to transhumanism by making us question the most fundamental notion of human identity, our gender.
Okay, I'll pause there. So her point is that, and this is interesting. I think this is something that I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are about this. So obviously, there's a couple ways to think about the sudden obsession with gender, and oftentimes it's being framed as sort of a civil rights issue for a very small minority that need to be protected. I would say that's kind of like the secular framing. She is saying that this is all by way of really a collision between two massive forces. One force that is an attempt to remake the world in such a way that we can all transcend the basic elements of humanity, right? You basically have like a natural world, which is and a trans human world. That these two worlds are in conflict, and that's really the essence of what we're experiencing right now. So yeah, what are your guys' thoughts about that?
The result of it is usually a decrease in fertility or repopulation, or procreation, and things like abortion. That's obvious. But even like the transgender movement, how that is not only creating people who don't want to have biological children, but are usually incapable of having biological children once they undergo certain hormones or surgeries. And then even things like even just agriculture and like the meat industry and things like that, like how it's making us have like a sicker society than we ever have, causing us to be more sick and dependent and more diagnosed with mental illnesses. So not just like physical illnesses, but also mental illnesses. So I just think it's crazy that you can trace so many of these things back to that issue. And it seems like, I don't know if this is the they that she was talking about, but to me, it seemed like a lot of it was being pushed by the woke agenda.
Yeah. So I think really framing this as these two like big ideas about the nature of the world. So a big idea is the world is fundamentally well designed, that gender is a gift, that the natural world and the food and the closer you get to kind of creation's original design is always a positive thing, and that we are essentially beings that were designed for the reality that we're living in. I would say that's kind of the biblical idea. And then there's what I would say is a bit of a natural conclusion from more of an evolutionary worldview, which is, wow, in the universe, a being has evolved to suddenly seize control of a random process of evolution and steer it in whatever direction we want. And so let's take a big step back and think about what we want reality to look like. What do we want a human being to be? And really what's happening is this question is being asked within a cultural context in which freedom is the highest value, right? So we live and swim in a culture in which individual expression has become, in our culture, the one agreed upon massive top value. And so at the same moment we are seizing control of our own evolution, this is according to this story, we why not steer it in the direction of our highest value, this idea of individual self-expression? These are such different ways to view the world. It's hard to even overstate how radically different these ideas are.
I have had an Instagram and I have like taken breaks and I've been around kids when I didn't have a phone, and I have been around kids when I do have a phone, and I have been around kids when phones are like at school when they're not allowed to be out, and then when they are allowed to be out. And the differences in the way that we socialize is crazy. Like
I have had the most fun, the most social interaction when I am around kids who aren't allowed to have their phone out, or kids that don't have social media. They have the most creative minds. They come up with games to play. Like it's when kids who have their phones out, they're just not talking about anything. Or when I'm around kids who are so deep in social media, they have nothing fruitful to talk about, and they can't come up with any ideas of what to do except to like watch something or talk about something they saw online. And it's become such a like a fruitless, mindless way of interacting with other kids. And like it's kind of scary and shocking. And I have been through like all the different kinds of people where I know this kid has been on YouTube Shorts or Instagram for like half of their day, and this is all they're thinking about, all they're talking about. Or I've been around kids who don't even have a phone, and they are incredibly enjoyable to be around. And like those differences, I think, are showing up in such young kids, and I can't imagine what the public schools look like right now.
Yeah, I feel like it's so hard to not think of this as a scheme, because like the they might be hard to like pinpoint as people, like as the government, is it the teachers? But I feel like since we believe in an enemy who schemes, I feel like it's so easy to just like point to him because it's so like well thought out. Because it started small, like all of this stuff started small and is now like down this path, this slippery slope. It's good that they're not being killed or arrested or anything. But then as soon as that starts, then you start teaching kids that it's okay. Then we've just seen like a huge uprise in people who identify as gay or now like queer. When you start teaching it in the classroom, bringing it to children who wouldn't have even thought of that in the first place. And then that leads to teaching them about sex at a super young age, which has been crazy. And then teaching them about gender and like all these things. And it's really snowballed, and Beach was kind of a different place. And then she like talked about more modern stuff, like specifically modern stuff like the transgender movement and all of that, and how it's leading to kids questioning their gender and all these things. So yeah, I be well thought out and planned, and it's ended up here.
I heard a quote from Elon Musk once, and I'm going to totally botch it, but he said something like, there's like the fear of overpopulation at one point, like a few decades ago. He was like, there's no more like better way to like go extinct than to believe that like procreating is a threat. Like that's the best way to go extinct, basically. And if you look at all of these issues and how they're like I don't know the statistic outcome of a lot of them is a less like lower population. You can see fertility, gendered kids, and whatever. Like what is that going to look like 50 years from now?
So this one is actually how to talk to a toddler or a young child and get what you want from them. And he gives a bunch of great advice about energy. And then he says something about how to ask questions that I thought was hilarious and dead on. And it's such a basic trick or technique that I think most people aren't aware of. We definitely use this with your brother Jackson a lot. But I haven't heard other people talk about it. So I'm curious what you guys think about this one. So I'm going to pull this up here
for just a second so I can explain this to you, because this is something that a lot of folks get wrong. And if you record yourself doing a lesson, you'll see just how many times you mess this up without ever realizing this, okay? And it goes like this. There's 3 things we can give a child during learning time. We can ask them a question, like, do you want to do the learning time? We can tell them a statement, like, it is learning time. Or we can give them a direction that says, okay, tell me the first sound.
Okay, so he's a teacher. That's the context of this, but this is such an interesting. So first frame up is questions, statements, and directions. And so he's going to kind of talk through how to use each of these tools.
With questions, we leave it open for whatever our kid wants to say. When we ask a question, what we're telling our kid is the answer is not important. You get to choose.
Okay, so the point of a question, and he doesn't explain this perfectly well, so I just wanted to make sure you guys understand what he's saying here. The point of a question is to cause a child to think they have a choice when they really don't have a choice. What they're choosing is not important. It's not going to change in any kind of dramatic way what you're going to do. So here he goes.
So I've got my bear, okay? And I start my lesson. And I say, okay, do you want to do your sounds today? Guess what? Bear now gets to choose. And bear can say no. And if bear says no, I have to respect that because I gave bear the choice.
So he's saying that's a bad question. Do not ask your kids, do you want to do what we're about to do? Because, that if they say no, then you have to respect the fact that you were asking them the question. He's just basically saying that's a bad question to ask. He's going to tell you what a good question sounds like.
Okay. We don't ask questions about things that matter. We don't. We give direction. Now, some of us, we think we're giving directions when in reality, we're giving statements. We're saying, okay, it's learning time, and our kid is running away. Saying, okay, I've got the sounds out, let's go. The kid is jumping around. It's not going to work, okay? Statements are just that. It is literally something we're saying. It is not a direction. So if we've got kid here, watch the posture. Okay, just like this.
So earlier he said really basic stuff like look him in the eye, make physical contact, and bring your body close to them so they can feel your energy. So he's already explained that, but this is the part that I find really funny.
We're ready to go. We're going to give them a very clear direction, not a question, not a statement. We're going to tell them what's going to happen. Okay, sweetheart, we're going to practice 10 words. When I show the word, you're going to blend it back to me. And then after those 10 words, we're going to go play. That is a crystal clear direction. And if you set up your camera and you count, literally do tally marks, how many times you ask questions, how many times you make statements, how many times you give directions, you'll see that you are probably asking the wrong questions and failing to give clear direction.
Parents are terrified to give their kids direction. So that they will ask the wrong question to anything to avoid or make statements, anything to avoid giving a direct. And so one of the things that this guy says earlier in the video is that he asks for the hardest kids in the school because he uses this technique and it completely changes their life. Kids need this kind of, they don't have the wisdom. This is the great, I think, mistake that we make. We think kids have the wisdom somehow to know what to do. He's teaching toddlers how to read. That's his whole channel. But you have to understand how to direct a child. And this is just absolutely brilliant.
Now, does that mean you shouldn't ask any questions at all? No, you should ask a ton of questions. Okay. I sprinkle the learning environment with questions all over. The difference is the questions don't matter. It makes Bear feel like Bear is getting to choose the learning. It makes Bear feel like they're getting a choice. When in reality, I'm just setting Bear up to be happy, to be successful, and I'm giving a direction. I might say, okay, do you want to start with this sound? Or do you want to start with this sound?
So this is the kind of question he's saying that doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if you start with E or A. Who cares? But you give the kid a choice, and they're going to be much more bought into the lesson if they are given a choice, even though their answer doesn't change the fact that they're going to get a lesson either way. It will change which lesson they start with.
I don't care which one Bear chooses. Bear might care. I don't care, right? I might say, okay, do you want to start with the red marker or do you want to start with the green marker? The green marker? Okay, do you want to take the top off or do you want me to take it off? You want to take the top off? Here you go. You can take the top off the green.
So good. So yeah, you're just giving them a sense of, agency over their situation. And it matters hugely to the child, but it of course doesn't matter to the teacher or the parent.
Marker. Great. Show up there. Now, which word do you want? Do you want to erase the word or do you want me? Lots of questions, right? Bear is now in control. Bear is having fun. But what I'm not going to do is say, okay, do you want to work or do you want to not work? Because Bear is going to say, I don't want to work. We give questions about stuff that does not matter, and we give clear directions when it does. Okay?
Okay. All right. What do you guys think? I just thought, this is so simple, such a basic thing. But I think part of our philosophy of teaching, or almost like our psychology or philosophy or anthropology of a child, causes people not to think this way. Kids are, you don't direct a child, and he's just saying, yes, you do. This is how it's done. You give them very specific directions. You give them lots of questions about things that actually don't change what you're ultimately going to do. Yeah. Any thoughts about this? That was such a great point.
I've heard that like ask your kid questions, like give them control before. And I've never liked how it's been phrased before because I'm like, I don't want to give my kid control, like they're not in charge.
Right.
And so I like how he's doing it in such a way that still gives them like the illusion of control without giving them any authority over how their time is spent or over what they are or not allowed to do.
Yeah. So mom would say that when Jackson wanted to go to bed, she wouldn't ask him, do you want to go to bed now? She'd say, do you want to wear your green jammies or your red jammies? and the difference between I don't want to go to bed and so again, direction, we're going to go to bed, like you're going to go up the stairs, you're going to get in your bed. Would you like your green jammies or your red jammies? Like that is such a great way to do it. You don't want to ask your kid, do you want to go, or make a statement. You give direction and you give a question about something that doesn't matter. It's so simple. I'm just like, we just got to spread the word about this because it is a basic tactic that is so helpful.
Well, it almost distracts them from the thing they don't want to do because you're just like, okay, it's time to go to bed. And instead of giving them the opportunity to get upset about that, they're too busy thinking about what kind of jammies they want to wear.
Yes. They're too busy themselves exerting their preference over something that doesn't matter, right? But something that matters to them and makes them, and gives them that feeling of, okay, I do have some agency, and they do, but it's in a very tiny realm, which is the extent of the agency that they deserve when they're a 4-year-old, because they don't have the wisdom to know what time they should go to bed, right? But they have the wisdom to be able to figure out whether or not they want to wear green or red jammies.
Need a blueprint to revise your family to be a multi-generational team on mission? The book Family Revision by Jeremy Pryor is the book that summarizes all the big picture ideas you hear on this podcast. Available on Amazon or familyteams.com.
So, yeah, I love this approach. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like it's a very common gentle parenting practice to ask the kids the important questions. And it ends up ruling their day and not going where they wanted it to. And I feel like I feel like a lot of gentle parenting is coming from a good place and they're just like missing the mark. Sometimes just missing the mark and sometimes way missing the mark. I feel like with this one, they are like just missing the mark, where it's like they feel that need to like, make the child feel like they're somewhat in control. Like they're not a robot with all of their actions being controlled. But they are not mature enough to realize that, oh, it's time for school. It is good for me to just sit down and do work right now. They don't notice that. They have to be guided in that way. And so it's good to I've never heard that wording being used. I feel like he was wording it well with like the direction and when it's good to ask good questions and make statements and all that stuff. And yeah, I feel like that's not normally talked about. It's usually questions or statements. So I think that was a really good piece of advice.
Cool. All right, guys, we're going to get super philosophical. You ready? All right, I'm going to pull up another video. And this is 2 atheists talking about, so Alex O'Connor is one of the most famous atheists on the internet, talking to probably the most famous atheist alive, Richard Dawkins. And he presents, again, both of these guys are atheists, but Alex O'Connor presents Richard Dawkins with the argument from desire from C.S. Lewis. It's so interesting what happens here. So I love this conversation. I want to play this for you guys to see what you think here. So
So you guys are both atheists?
Yes, they're both atheists. Here we go.
Well, on this topic of debates and arguments for God's existence anyway, I suppose what I wanted to do was ask you about 2 arguments that I've been thinking about related to God's existence, but specifically related to evolution and naturalism as well, because I think that these are questions which I'm sure you've commented on before somewhere, but I guess I'd like to probe again.
Yeah.
One of these is Lewis's argument from desire, which sounds like a very silly argument on the face of it. He essentially says something along the lines of, look, everybody seems to have an innate desire for something a bit beyond the natural, something a bit supernatural, something, beauty, purpose, this kind of intangible stuff.
So beauty, purpose, justice, so much of, everyone, our lives are almost obsessed with desires for things that are not rooted in the physical world necessarily.
And he says, I actually wrote down the way he puts it in Mere Christianity. He says most people, if they had really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want, and want acutely, something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give it to them, that offer to give it to you, but never quite keep their promise. And then later, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world.
You guys understand the argument? So
Yes. Yeah.
Such an interesting argument.
And like I say, on the face of it, that sounds maybe a little bit silly. But there is a serious question in here that most of the time when we evolve a desire for something, we evolve a desire for food, for warmth, this kind of thing. The reason for that is because this desire gives us reason to seek out those things in the real world. If there were no food and digestion, if there were no temperature, it would make no sense for us to evolve a desire for food, for temperature, for warmth. Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. Why would that even evolve in the first place if it doesn't actually latch on to anything in the real world? And although I'm not sure if Lewis was aware of this, we know anthropologically that almost everywhere we look in the world, we find people with religious sensibilities. They have some kind of either desire or apprehension of something beyond themselves, something divine. And I suppose the question Lewis asks is, from an evolutionary perspective, why would it be that we would universally evolve that desire if that desire doesn't actually latch onto anything in reality?
That's actually a very odd argument. Because we have a desire to survive and live, which makes perfect evolutionary sense, it's a natural projection of that desire that we might desire to go on living after we die, the desire for eternal life.
Because do you see what's wrong with his argument?
Yeah.
What do you think is, where is he misunderstanding or taking this?
Well, what I think. Sorry, you can go, Sid. Well, I thought it was interesting that he went immediately to the eternal life thing,
right,
when the guy didn't really mention that.
Yeah, there's so many, that's what's so interesting about this argument. Yeah, you could potentially say, well, we would want to go on living, but he said beauty,
Yeah.
religion, good, truth or justice, purpose, meaning, these things that within Richard Dawkins' framework actually don't exist. These things do not exist within a materialistic, where if all that exists is matter, and Richard Dawkins has made this case that all the things that we care most about are essentially fictions, but those are the things we care most about. How did that happen? And he has really struggles with even understanding the argument.
You could easily see that as just an extension of the perfectly Darwinian desire to go on living. I think it's just another example of that. That particular part of it is, I suppose. What else did he say? The desire for something beyond.
He says, want acutely something that cannot be had in this world. He says a lot more about it in Mere Christianity, but he says, if I find it myself in a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world.
Yes. The idea that because you want something, therefore it must be true, I find that a most extraordinary idea.
It does seem strange to want something that doesn't exist.
Why?
Because if we're trying to give an account of where this desire comes from, it seems to have to latch onto something. And it seems like what you're suggesting is that what it's latching onto is just the general desire to stay alive as long as possible.
Well, that I was thinking specifically of the desire for eternal life, John, but I think you can do a kind of version of that for whatever else C.S. Lewis was saying. Um, some people may have a sexual desire for a film star that they're never going to meet and wouldn't look at them if they did, and that doesn't mean that there's anything realistic about it. It's a natural extension of sexual desire.
Of course, the film star exists.
Well, it doesn't exist in any realistic sense as far as this wretched person is concerned. Sure. I mean, you could talk about a desire for 72 virgins in an Islamic heaven. That doesn't exist. But it's easy to see it as a projection of an ordinary biological desire.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. Maybe if not in the detail, with the suggestion that the desire can be for something real, and that the image of God or afterlife or eternality are just sort of warped or extended versions of a real thing. That is, the afterlife is an extension of the desire to be alive.
I mean, a physicist might desire a solution to the theory of everything and the unification of gravity and quantum theory.
Yeah, that's what C.S. Lewis says. They desire God.
And that was the knockout punch. Oh my gosh. I couldn't believe this interchange. It was so fascinating to me.
That's crazy.
He actually ends with an example of what a physicist desires, which is a theory for how everything came into existence. Is there a single solitary, is there a singularity to that? Because there's something within every physicist that believes that that would be the most elegant solution. And Alex O'Connor can't help but laugh and say, they're desiring God. I just was like, I was just like kind of dumbstruck with this interchange, because I've always found Lewis's argument from desire, like it's not in my top 5, but man, this really bumped it up for me. Oh my gosh, I really had to think about it some more, and this is why I wanted to share with you guys, because there's a great book. I don't know if you guys ever read A Severe Mercy. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. And Lewis, it's a biography, and in there, Lewis, I think, convinces this brilliant writer, Sheldon Van Auken. One of the arguments he uses a version of the argument from desire on Sheldon, and it really, I think it was maybe the argument that tipped Sheldon over the edge in their interchange. They were corresponding through letters. It's a great book because it has a bunch of unpublished letters by C.S. Lewis. But I do think that Lewis, as he was encountering atheists, found that this was such a useful conversation. And you can see it sort of plays right into the hands of an evolutionist, because an evolutionist has to believe that every desire is somehow natural and it emerges somehow because it gives us an advantage. And so to have an evolutionist so aggressively attack religion when it seems to emerge everywhere independently, and suggest that there's nothing good about it, which is really what Richard Dawkins did try to write in The God Delusion, that it's sort of like a virus, like in our brains. It's so counter his whole worldview. And so I think Alex O'Connor's decision to go there and say, let's really wrestle with Lewis's argument from desire and see if the greatest atheist alive can give us an explanation for this, because he's not just an atheist, but he's a brilliant biologist and evolutionary theorist. And he was unable, seems like initially, to fully comprehend the question. And then when he actually attempted to answer it, he gives the answer that would lead you straight to God. How did that just happen on the internet? Anyway, any other thoughts on that? I just thought that was such an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I find it so fascinating that even that other guy was like so stumped by it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't think of that argument as being able to stump atheists, but I mean, I stand corrected. But he has a point. I don't know how that would be evolutionarily advantageous to us to start believing in a God and something greater. I don't see how that would like scientifically help us in any way to progress other than maybe giving us a purpose, but I don't know why that would happen scientifically across the universe or across the world where there's like different religions in every society. Like it really is a mystery that can only really be explained by, oh, maybe it is a reality and everyone is trying to perceive that reality in different ways because not all of them have been exposed to the real God. And so they just start perceiving it in different ways with different gods. So that's so interesting. And yeah, I read The Origin of Species for school, and it was so interesting what he had to say about beauty. What I remember is that he said that the only purpose for beauty is for reproduction, and that's what the guy said. Richard Dawkins said in that podcast, but like The Origin of Species is actually like full of Darwin saying, and I don't know, like there's a whole lot of him saying, yeah, I don't know why it's like this. And he said like he's very that's like the only explanation that he can find for beauty, and like anything outside of sexuality is like not evolutionarily advantageous. So it's like, why is it so popular? Why is it so loved?
Yes. Yeah, I love kind of walking through a lot of these desires. I also think this is a really interesting, there's really two ways in which you can think about the existence of God or evidence for the existence of God. One is sort of from the bottom up, and the other is from the top down. Like bottom up is like, do we see evidence anywhere in the world? And a lot of scientists always want to start there. Lewis kind of did it in reverse, which he would sort of ask himself, given the way the world is designed, like much like bigger picture, what makes the most sense of what I see in reality? Like he had a quote once where he said something like, I believe in the sun not because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Like you don't have to like see the sun on a cloudy day to believe it exists, but when you do believe in the existence of the sun, it makes sense of what you actually experience. And so he felt like Christianity was such an incredibly clear and by far the best explanation for what we actually are experiencing. And I think that's such an important thought experiment. If your evolutionary kind of account of reality were to exist, why would people be obsessed with morality? Why would people obsessed with justice? Why would people be obsessed with truth and beauty? Why would people want and long for another world? A fish, this is what he said to Sheldon, a fish doesn't complain that it's wet, but a human complains all the time about the basic nature of reality. How did that happen? I just love that line of thinking. So I think that's a great interchange between two brilliant atheists. I got one last one for you guys before we go. Our family is really interested in Israel, and there was a discussion about the two-state solution that I thought was interesting that I wanted to end with here. So I will play this for you guys.
On the question of the West Bank, frankly, in Israel, there are very few people in Israel who believe that even if you can have a two-state solution, now is a good time to talk about it. I was in the Knesset, the parliament, earlier today, and among other people saw the head of the left-wing opposition, Mr. Lapid. He doesn't believe this is a time to speak about a two-state solution. Why? Because if you gave a state to the Palestinians, and don't forget, Israel did give a state to the Palestinians in 2005 in the Gaza, and look what we got from it. The world got its money ransacked, the Hamas leaders making themselves fantastically rich and then sending rockets into Israel. So the first thing is, even the most left-wing figures in Israeli politics don't think this is a good time to talk about the two-state solution because, among other things, it would suggest that there was a reward for the terrorists of October the 7th. And the reward for the actions of that day was to double down on giving the Palestinians yet another state. The second thing that has to be said about that, if I may, is that on the subject of the West Bank, if you go to the West Bank, as I was again the other night, and if you stand in the hills overlooking Israel, you will see from those hills the lights of Tel Aviv, the city I'm standing in at the moment. You'll see the lights of Haifa, and you'll see the lights of Ben Gurion Airport. Now, knowing what Israel knows about what Hamas did with the Gaza, making it into a military infrastructure and firing rockets at southern and central Israel, why on earth would the Israelis give another piece of territory which they didn't have security over in the West Bank to another Palestinian faction, which would have the ability to fire similar rockets at every single part of Israel? And I need to add one other thing quickly. On the subject of the Palestinian Authority, many people outside Israel seem to think that the Palestinian Authority is, as it were, the peaceable wing of Hamas, or is the sort of Sinn Féin to Hamas's IRA. That is not the case. The Palestinian Authority, as well as being a deeply corrupt entity, which I don't need to tell Mr. Barghouti about, he knows well about that, as well as being a deeply corrupt entity, the Palestinian Authority that is funded by the Israelis, as well as the Europeans, the British, and the rest of the international community, pays salaries to terrorists. It pays salaries to the people who kill people in Israel. And that is something absolutely impossible to make peace with.
Oof. Okay. So the reason why this is coming up is that as much as the Biden administration has been really supporting Israel, Blinken, the current Secretary of State, has been over there really advocating for a two-state solution. And Netanyahu, for the first time, I mean, he's always given some kind of lip service to, that's a possibility. We can talk about that if it all works out. Now they just are shutting down the conversation, not just the right wing political parties in Israel, but now even the left wings political parties who've been much more aggressive in favor of a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, are now saying that they don't want to talk about it. This is a really, I wanted to, just as our family is so invested in Israel, I wanted to say something about this topic because I think this is going to really affect our lives in a lot of ways in going forward. I think as long as there was hope in a two-state solution, even if it was remote, it created the reason for ongoing possible negotiations. It created kind of a way for the U.S. to support Israel in a way that they felt that could result in a positive experience someday for the Palestinians if it ended up a two-state solution. We're entering into a new era of sort of this conflict where there is going to be the experience of no hope. Like the two parts, we always knew that they were so far apart, but now this is like shooting the last thing that was always unrealistic. There's always been, I thought there was always fatal problems with the idea of a two-state solution, but now there's no way Israel will ever allow that to happen, ever. There's just no way after October 7th that they would ever create a Hamas-led state in the West Bank that is going to create way more than 10 times more security problems for Israel than Gaza ever did. That will never happen, like not in our lifetime. That can't be the solution. But there is no other solution. And so the U.S. has to constantly go back to Israel and advocate for this non-solution. And Netanyahu is now saying it's over. What's going to happen? What does this mean? I don't know. Like it's a really different time. It's a scary development. Do you guys have any thoughts or reactions to that?
Well, and even giving them the Gaza Strip in 2005, it was kind of like an experiment. Like, okay, what will they do with their own country? And if there were universities and like a flourishing economy and like, if they're healthy families and like infrastructure and factories and things like that they were able to build with all of the aid that they were given, then they might have an argument that they would do good with the like another state like the West Bank or something, whether Israel wanted to or not. They could at least argue like, look what we've done with the small amount of land you've given us, we can steward even more land. But after October 7th, it's pretty clear that it was a failed experiment. Giving them more land isn't going to give them what they need in order to have a flourishing civilization. It's just going to give them more land, weapons, and people for acts of terror. Even like the prisoners that Israel has like released in the negotiations, they've already been like committing more terrorist attacks. Like they're not leaving like, okay, we learned our lesson. We're going to go back to our nice loving families and like live peacefully. They're like going home to their even more radicalized nation, and they're like even more incentivized to commit more acts of terror. So it's kind of a failed experiment.
Yes. Another thing that was pointed out, I think later in the interview, is that something like, I don't know if it's 70 to 80% of the West Bank Palestinians were favorable towards what Hamas did on October 7th. Can you imagine that? So, how, imagine, like, again, this problem is getting so much worse. There's the divide is getting so much deeper.
Well, the prisoners that were released that I was just talking about were from the West Bank. Like they rode cars into a group of Jews and IDF soldiers. So like it's not just Palestinians from the Gaza Strip that believe this way or behave this way.
Yeah, and I have a lot of sympathy for the Palestinians. Like I can imagine being in their position of having such a horribly run state that's just overwrought with terrorism, and any funding that is given to their state just goes straight to that. Like that breaks my heart, and they're the ones that pay for all of this. And so I like this decision is so hard, but it's so impossible because you don't want to do anything to hurt those civilians. But this is what they've done with their own state, and they've given the power over to the terrorists. And so it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like when we get rid of the terrorists, it'll get rid of these civilians that didn't do anything. And I think it's hard for people to see the perspective of Israel and what an impossible decision that is, and how they just see fighting Hamas as synonymous with fighting the Gazans, the civilians that are dying. And I think that's horrible. But like that guy had so many, like, why would Israel give such a strategic location to terrorists? Like, think of it from their perspective. Why would they do that? Like that is not, there was a solution. There was a possibility, a hope of a solution. But they've just made it impossible. And I don't know how it can be achieved anymore. Like it's just not realistic.
All right, guys. Well, that's the end of our roundup for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This has been fun to share these, and we will do it again next week. See you guys.
All right.
Awesome. See ya. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.